Përshëndetje motra.
Mirë se keni ardhur në Trime podcast.
I'm Leonarda.
I'm Lejla.
Welcome home.
Leo. We are on our 23rd episode. Wow, how did we get here?
How did we get here?
23rd episode. You know, I counted earlier today, 7 months, including the month of planning that we did. So in 7 months, we've recorded 23 episodes. We now have a team of 14 volunteers. All 14 incredible Albanian women who wanted to volunteer with us. Literally the creme de la creme.
Yeah.
They are phenomenal and we cannot wait to get started with them.
Yes.
So we have been really busy behind the scenes, even though our content's been a little bit slow. Please don't mistake that for us not doing anything behind the scenes, even though the both of us, like, we purely volunteer for Trime. But it's like we work on it full time.
Yeah,
full time without getting paid. What are we doing?
Well, it's our passion. It's our purpose.
Well, it's our purpose. I think when something is your purpose, it's always going to lead you to the right place, isn't it?
Yeah.
So with that said, a few weeks ago, we put a little comment box out on our Instagram, didn't we? And we asked what you all wanted, the kind of content, the kind of topics you wanted us to discuss. So the one topic that came up quite a lot was how to better manage being disowned for dating or marrying outside of the culture. Now, I have plentiful lived experience in this arena.
This is a very hot topic.
And we know, like, as we've seen the trend lately on TikTok, never break the rule trend. And we've seen a lot of Albanian women coming forward, a lot of gay Albanian men coming forward and taking part of the trend.
Yeah.
And it's definitely an important topic to discuss because it's a big issue in our community, especially in particular for women. I guess it's weird because when I was growing up, I always knew that dating outside of the culture and outside of our race was going to be a big no-no. And I always knew that it would cause issues. Like, it was ingrained in me from childhood. And I think quite a lot of women our generation probably would say that they felt the same growing up. And I think actually if you didn't, I'd be like, really? Like, I would be like, you're lying, because we were taught, like, Albanians only marry Albanians. And if you married outside the culture, that kind of made you a traitor to our culture. So when I was younger, I wasn't attracted to Albanian men. And I mean, just white men in general. I wasn't attracted to them at all. And of course, now we know that I wasn't actually attracted to men at all. Like, but that's a different episode. And we've already covered that. You're going to have to go watch that episode. But anyway, from a really young age, I knew that my dating choices were always going to cause a bit of, not a little bit, but a huge issue. Whether it was men or women, like, I knew that it was going to cause a huge issue with my parents. So naturally, I completely suppressed and ignored the fact that I was gay from a young age, choosing instead to date men in some desperate way to assimilate into, like, heteronormative lifestyle, right? So my first ever boyfriend, I was 16 when I met him, 15 or 16. Like, I can't exactly remember. I was in going
11.
into college, year 11. Yeah. So 15, 16. And he was black. He was only like a year older than me. And he was a sweetheart. Like, as far as, you know, like, first time relationships when you're a teenage girl, like, a lot of young girls have awful experiences, like, when they have their first boyfriend. For me, he was a sweetheart. Like, we ended up going to the same college. He would carry my books around. He would literally carry my books and my bag around. That's how much of a sweetheart he was. So about a year into our relationship, my parents found out that I had a boyfriend. Yeah. About a year into our relationship, my parents found out that I had a boyfriend, and all hell broke loose. Like, it was not a good day. Like, it was probably, I think, like, one of the worst days of my life. I'm laughing now, but it was not funny. Let's just make that really clear. Like, sometimes it's a bit of a trauma response. So my dad had been monitoring my MSN messenger conversation. Now, that's how old I am. That's how old I am. Yeah. Like, this is like, I'm 35. So 20 years ago. So my dad had been monitoring my MSN messenger conversations and had seen conversations between me and him.
That's so cringe.
But you know how cringe it was as well. Not just from the size of the fact, like, it wasn't even anything like filthy. Like, it was pure and utter cringy love. Like, oh my God, baby, I love you so much. I can't wait to see you. Like it was pure cringy, like teenage love. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so what happened?
So I was at college and I got home and I remember it was like, I think it was like October or November, so it was dark. And you know, like when us Albanian girls, and I was not allowed out after dark. The only time was for school and college, right? Anyway, so I remember it being dark, so it was definitely around the winter time. And they were literally sitting on the sofa or waiting for me as I got in.
Oh my God.
And I opened the front door, my heart immediately sunk. I was like, oh no, like, well, what? I'm thinking in my head, like, what have I done? What have I done? But I always thought I was really good at covering my tracks. It never occurred to me that my dad was monitoring my conversations on MSN, not even for a second. So I got in, I sat down, and they started interrogating me, like asking me question after question after question. And they had already, I think they realised that he wasn't Albanian, but they had assumed that he was white English. And at some point when we were talking, I let it slip that he was actually black. My dad lost his shit, like lost his complete shit, called me every name imaginable, every name you can think of under the sun. And when he saw that I wasn't backing down and that I didn't see anything wrong with what I was doing, and for standing up for myself, because I was really standing up for myself in the conversation. It wasn't a conversation, by the way. I don't think conversation is the right way to describe what happened that night.
More interrogation.
Quite literally was like
an FBI interrogation.
Yeah. It was like an interrogation. So the more that my dad could see that I was like standing up for myself and I wasn't backing down, it was just making him like more and more angry. He was getting more and more riled up. And at one point he just screamed at me. He was like, "Dear," flinched and spat in my face. Like, and I mean like full on gobbed, like from one side of the room to the other, like, and it landed straight in my face. And it was just one of the most degrading things that anyone has ever done to me. And like, I was with a perpetrator for 8.5 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, and he did a lot of shit. But that particular incident, just I've never ever been able to like get it out of my mind. And it's only been recently that I actually started to talk about it. I remember telling my therapist, and his jaw just like was on the floor.
Yeah.
And then recently I told Dan as well, and she had the same reaction. And I never really like thought it was that. Of course I knew it was bad. Like it always, after that, like I my self-worth plummeted and I felt so degraded. But I guess like the severity of what happened didn't hit until I got that reaction from my therapist and from Dan. Because you have to understand, like, I thought it was normal. Yeah. I thought it was normal to be treated like that. Like, that's just what it was like for me growing up. So when that happened, it was just, life was hell. Yeah. After that evening, I was like ignored, emotionally blackmailed, and the tension just became so unbearable in my home that like after months and months and months of it, I ended up actually lying to my parents and saying, "Oh, I've broken up my boyfriend. Like, I really don't want to upset you guys," thinking that would ease the situation. Yeah. And it didn't. If anything, from that point onwards, my dad held even more contempt than before towards me. So, of course, this like seriously impacted. And I say all of this in hindsight because hindsight's 2020. So when I talk about this so clearly, I'm 35. Like, this happened 20 years ago, and it's been a long time that I've sat on it and ruminated over it and grieved over it and, you know, all of that. Because it did seriously impact my self-worth. Like, my self-worth plummeted, and it was worse than it was ever during my childhood. I think it was like that defining moment when I realised that I was never going to be accepted, not just for who I was, but also for my dating choices. So from then on, I knew I had to keep it a secret. Yeah. I knew that I couldn't tell my parents or anyone in my family who I was dating and all of that. And so I did. Like, I hid it. I hid it for a really long time. I hid my dating life from my family until obviously then I met my now ex-husband, and I became pregnant because you can't hide being pregnant. No. Can you? Like,
it must have been really lonely to hide your dating life.
It was lonely because, you know, like, certain things happen and you want to talk to your mum, like you want to get some advice about it. But I never had that. You know, like, I probably a lot of time put myself in really dangerous situations because I didn't have the guidance from, you know, an older figure in my family, an older role model, to be like, no, don't do that. Like, that's not safe. I never had that. So I put myself in a lot of dangerous situations that could have been avoided.
Yeah.
And then when I did tell my mum eventually that I was pregnant, like her immediate response was like, what's your dad going to say? What's your dad going to do? And then it was, what are people going to say? Ska kan thon halkid. And then when I told her that I was keeping the baby, it was like, you have to leave. You have to leave. You can't come back. So I then went to stay with my boyfriend at the time, who we all know is now my ex-husband. But eventually I ended up having to make like a homeless application to the local council. And I'll never forget that day. It's another day that sticks out in my memory, because you obviously give your story to the council, to the housing officer. And there I am explaining to this housing officer this history, this family history, and the reason why I've, been made homeless. And the housing officer was so shocked. They have to verify the story. So that's what happens. Everyone who's in the UK has had to make a homeless application. You know that your housing officer would have to verify what you're saying is true. So I had to give them my house number. Yeah. Because I was like, how else am I going to prove it?
Yeah, exactly.
So I had to give them the phone number. The housing officer called the house, and my dad picked up and, asked him to verify the story. And my dad said to her, I don't have a daughter. Yeah. Knowing full well that I was pregnant and homeless, knowing that that would have been my path to safety, said I don't have a daughter. And I hadn't spoken to my parents for a good few months at that point. Like, that kind of, the isolation had already taken place, that being outcasted from the family and the community had happened. I knew that he knew I was pregnant and homeless. He knew his daughter was pregnant, had no place to stay, is vulnerable. Every woman who is pregnant, no matter what age, is at their most vulnerable. And yet when, he could have done something to help me in that situation, he just said, I don't have a daughter. And that's how far I guess he was willing to go. And that's what I had to deal with most of my life. So when people say, when I see in the comments like, this stuff doesn't happen, and I'm like, shut up. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It absolutely does. And it's happening to young Albanian girls and women everywhere. And the more we're ignorant about it, the more we try and brush it under the carpet and give this perfect portrayal, where this tight-knit community, the more we're actually putting young Albanian girls at risk.
Yeah.
Because they have nowhere to turn to, just like what happened with me. So eventually in my third trimester, my mum, she did get back in contact, and basically what happened is Jusha and Tezia had spoken to her. So my nan and my aunt had a good stern conversation with my mum, was like, Chetubo, you can't do that to your daughter. Who cares? Who cares who she's dating? Who cares who she marries? Obviously for my nan, you know what, in our culture, she was like, who cares who she's going to marry?
Yeah.
I was nowhere near getting married. But for her, I was pregnant, I was married. I guess it helped my mum feel a little bit more comfortable supporting me. And don't get me wrong, I get it. I completely get it. And I understand that from my mum came out of pure fear.
Yeah.
Fear of what my dad would do, what he would say, fear of what the rest of the community would say. She was terrified. And I completely understand that. And then I think when she saw that she had support from my nan and my aunt, I think she just felt a bit more at ease to support me. And at the end of the day, this is something that is echoed through the community for women, that when they are terrified of what the rest of the community is going to say, what do you expect women to do? Do you know what I mean? They're going to act out of fear.
And the community does such a great job of isolating women.
Yeah.
They've set up this system where they have to depend on the community. They have to depend on their spouses, on their parents, whoever it is, because if you leave that, you are basically leaving this whole community and no one's going to help you. And it's for a lot of us Albanians, our identity of being an Albanian makes us who we are and what we are. And it's too difficult to leave all of that, because we are built on patriotism. We're, a lot of us are kids of genocide. So it's so difficult to leave that behind and then say, you know what, I'm going to just live my life and you do whatever you want. It doesn't work like that.
Absolutely.
It just doesn't, because we're such a complex culture.
And my mum genuinely believed that no one would stand by her if she stood by me.
Exactly.
And so I've always been very forgiving and graceful with my mum when it comes to that, because I just get it.
You know where she's coming from.
Yeah, I get it. And so once I reconnected with her, it was a lot easier than other family members followed. Like, I've always been connected with my siblings, but, you know, then other family members followed, like my aunts, uncles, cousins, because my dad is the eldest, and you know in our community what it's like. The eldest is just, you don't ever disrespect them. Like, even if they're wrong and abusive, you don't disrespect them. It's so ridiculous. It has to change.
And they just get away with so much bullshit.
Exactly. So that first 5 years of Bella's life, she didn't know my dad. Like, she had never met my dad. I had met plenty of times to like reach out, and I guess like in just a desperate hope to pull like that band-aid, that plaster off, not for me, but to take the burden off my mum. Like I try sending emails. I even sent pictures, like letters, and he just never responded to it. So me and mum had no choice but to see each other in secret for those first 5 years, and the same with the rest of my family too.
What a shame.
Yeah. No, but
what an
you're
actual
right.
shame, because the best thing you could do for your family is connect with your own family.
Yeah.
You know, you want the next generation to remember you as, you know, Jushe Mai Miran Bord.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't want to remember them as a piece of shit. Yeah. No offense.
No, no offense taken. Absolutely no offense taken whatsoever. At the end of the day, sometimes you just have to call it for what it is, and I'm not scared to do that. Yeah, I think a lot of time in our community, they've been like beaten into that submission of fear that they're too scared to talk about these things. I'm not. Yeah, I saw this thing today on Insta, and it was like, "You're so brave for telling your story," and it was like, "I'm not brave. Just a lot of shit's happened to me, and I can't stop talking." Yeah, like I can't shut up.
Because you've gone through so much, and you're like, "Fuck it. What am I gonna lose?
Exactly.
What am I gonna lose?
What am I gonna lose at this point? Like, all the worst stuff has happened to me. What am I gonna lose at this point?
There is scammer.
Exactly.
So, after 5 years, how did you reconnect, or how did you reconnect with your dad?
Yes, we did. I use the term reconcile and reconnect very loosely. In January 2020, I was like, fuck this shit, like, because I could just see it was stressing my mum so much. Like, it was really getting to her. She always tried to be really positive and supportive with me, but it was getting to her. I could see it. So in January 2020, I was just like, fuck this, I'm just confronting this head on. So I showed up to the house, to my family home, and I knew that my dad was going to be at home alone. I knew everyone else was back in Kosovo, so it was just my dad there at the house. So I literally just turned up at the door with Bella.
Your heart must have been...
It wasn't, though. That's the thing. It actually wasn't. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel nerves. For me, it was just like...
adrenaline.
No, I didn't. Everyone always asks me this question, but I didn't actually feel much. I didn't. It was, for me, it was like, I wasn't expecting anything out of it. I just thought, like, I have to do something. This was like the last resort, but I wasn't scared.
You had already prepared yourself for failure before you even
absolutely,
went in.
Yeah. I'd already accepted the worst. So I didn't have much fear. Maybe it was a little bit stupid of me, because fucking God knows what could have happened. And to be clear, I'm not advising anyone does that, because like, I don't know how safe other women are and they're not. So this is just my own personal lived experience. And I think also the reason why I didn't feel anything was because my dad and I never really had a relationship. Yeah. So like, even at that point when me and Bella turned up at the door, he didn't turn us away. Like, he actually welcomed us in. There still wasn't that like emotional reunion between me and him. There wasn't a moment like where we hugged and cried and promised that we were never going to be apart again. Like, he still had that same coldness, that same attitude towards me. So it wasn't this Disney moment whatsoever. But with Bella, he was different. He hugged her immediately, spoke to her, was asking her questions, getting to know her. And after that, I was able to go to my family's home, like as often as I wanted, which really relieved a lot of stress for my mum. It relieved a lot of stress for her, because she could finally have her daughter and granddaughter around without hiding it, without doing it in secret. But for me, it didn't relieve anything. Yeah. And I think I'd accepted that. And I think that's why I didn't feel much turning up at the door.
Yeah. This is just another day.
Yeah.
You're not expecting anything better, and you're just prepared. You're moving on.
I think for me, it was one of the first time in my adult life that I felt like I was doing something that wasn't for me, that it was for my mum and for Bella. It wasn't about how I felt in the moment. Like, did I want to reconcile? No, I'll be really honest. No, I didn't. I didn't want to. I didn't have this desire to reconnect and have some kind of relationship with him. So it wasn't about me. It was more so because I genuinely just couldn't watch my mum go through this constant stress in the back of her head of being separated in two different directions. And it was just painful to watch her. So I quickly realised at the time that spending time in the family home was kind of triggering for me. My dad hadn't changed. He definitely hadn't changed the way he was towards me. And just because Bella was in the picture now, it didn't mean that suddenly things were okay between us. And so fast forward to today, where I've had to set really firm boundaries for my own sake, for my mental health, for my recovery, because Bella spends loads of time with them.
Yeah.
Like, she spends as much time as she wants to, and I don't get in the way of that. They adore her, and she's really, really close to my mum. Like, my mum worships the ground that Bella walks on, but that's the kind of person my mum is.
Yeah.
My mum is so loving, so caring, so gentle. But for me, I just learned that love doesn't always look the way you expect it to, especially love in family, especially love from your parents. And I think we have this like idolized vision. And you know what? It's not to idolize. It's how it should be. I'm sorry. I completely correct myself on that. It should never be idolized to be loved and feel safe and warm and comfort around your parents. They are your primary caregivers. That's their responsibility in life.
It's their number one job. And
absolutely.
You should never feel like you have to fulfill certain conditions or certain expectations that they have for you then to receive love from them.
Absolutely,
it should never be a transaction.
Love from your parents should not be transactional. No. And the fact of the matter is, in this situation, I am the child. I am their child no matter how old I am.
Yeah.
So that doesn't change, regardless of whether I was 15, 21, 35 now, that I'm still this child in that situation, and they're still the parent, and it's their responsibility to create that safety, right? But for me, it was the first time that I thought sometimes the healthiest thing that we can do for ourselves is choose ourselves. And that's where I had to start setting down really firm boundaries with my family after that reconciliation.
Father ignored you for years, but when Bella came along, he accepted her instantly. How did that make you feel?
Honestly, like I said, I know I sound like I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I was so disconnected from my emotions by that point because I had to be. Yeah. Like, in order to survive, I had to learn how to disassociate from so many different parts of myself. So my feelings, my wants, the pain that I was feeling about my childhood. So when my dad welcomed Bella, after years of rejecting me, it didn't really spark deep emotions in me. Sad. Yeah. But you have to understand that I'd felt that sense of depression my whole childhood and most of my adult life. So I wasn't overwhelmed with joy or relief. I wasn't moved to tears. I just observed it.
As an outsider.
Yeah, it literally felt like it wasn't me. Like, it felt like I was watching someone else's life. Yeah. I didn't go into that moment thinking it was going to be like some Disney fantasy movie where we're suddenly going to be one big happy family again, because we were never that to begin with.
Yeah, but it must be traumatizing or sad, let's say, for your inner child, because your inner child is seeing how your parents or your dad, let's say, is treating Bella, and your inner child is seeing that as a child herself, and almost questioning herself, like.
Yeah, you're so right? Because how do we stop our own pain from shaping the choices that we make for our children? Like, of course, as parents, we always want, and we're always going to do everything we can to keep our kids safe. Yeah. Right. We only ever want the best for our children. And I wanted her to know her heritage. I wanted her to know where she was from. I wanted her to feel close to her culture. I wanted her, like, it takes a village to raise a child, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And my daughter deserves to be the center of that village.
100%.
And there are things that my parents can teach Bella about our history, about our food, our language, that I just simply can't do alone.
Yeah.
I simply can't do that alone. That's what real community is. A sense of, or what real community is supposed to be. A sense of belonging, feeling safe, knowing that you are so deeply loved that no one will ever let you go without. Right? And that's what we as Albanians pride ourselves in. But how can we claim to value a community when the support isn't extended unconditionally, especially to women and girls who are the most vulnerable? So no, it definitely wasn't easy for me, for my inner child. Like, I've had to grieve, I've had to get angry, I've had to cry, but I don't project that onto my child. I don't want that for her. Instead, I've channeled my emotions into my work. I go to therapy. Like, everybody knows this. Everybody in the whole fucking world knows this by now. For over half a decade, I've been going to therapy, okay? This is why I'm in therapy. So that I don't project this shit onto my kid. I refuse to repeat the cycle.
Yeah.
I refuse to repeat the cycle. I also lean on Dan a lot. Like, she is just phenomenal. Like, she is the best, most supportive person that has ever walked into my life. And
she's amazing.
She holds this incredible safe space for me where I know that I can, have these conversations and I can just be raw and I can unmask my true emotions and talk to her about it. And it's also one of the reasons why I talk so openly on this podcast. One of the reasons why I even started this podcast.
Yes.
Because this shit is hard.
It is hard.
This shit, having to process this shit and having to do this, especially as a parent, after having childhood trauma and then trauma in your adulthood, is fucking hard, and we shouldn't have to go through it alone.
No. And it needs to open the eyes of our community, because we all just think it's normal because we don't know any different.
Exactly.
We genuinely don't know any different. We don't think it's anything wrong because everyone is literally walking around with their chicken heads with the same trauma.
But I know what you mean, right? I know what you mean. And I had to find other ways of trying to process it that didn't mean projecting it onto Bella. And they're the things that help me process it, right? So therapy, strong relationship, and a sense of community, which I didn't have before Trime. I didn't have this sense of community amongst Albanian women.
No.
I didn't.
No, neither did I. Even though I didn't marry outside of the culture, and I can only assume that if I did, I probably would have had a similar experience as you, but I didn't. But I am still the black sheep. Me and my husband are still the black sheep.
I feel like an outsider.
I felt like an outsider until Trime started, until I met you. I felt like an outsider for my whole life.
Yeah, and that genuinely before. So I'm just going to say the same thing you'll say. Before Trime, I didn't have that sense of belonging. Like, obviously I've had other communities, but that truth, that thing that was deeply tied to my heritage and my identity, I never had that sense of community. So now that I have Trime, now that we have Trime, it's helped me so much in my own healing journey, like so deeply. And this is why I am really intentional about everything we do here, because this has become a tool in my own recovery.
Same.
This has become something that I now use in my toolbox, that I pull out. Trime, this helps me in my own personal journey. Sometimes the best way that I know how to channel things is by being creative. It's by doing creative, creating content. Yeah. So creating the podcast. Like with my other work, I've got like documentary series, and I did that because of being a survivor of domestic abuse. So these things have been how I've processed it myself without projecting it onto my daughter.
And it allows you to be your best self.
Yeah, absolutely.
You felt like you lost yourself and you lost your identity. So how do you think women can actually reclaim that and move forwards?
So for me personally, when I was ostracized and isolated from the community, right, it actually did something that I didn't expect it to. It gave me something I'd never had before, which was time and space to figure out who I am. It really forced me to ask myself, like, who am I? Sorry for the cliche, but who am I outside of what's expected of me? And I thought, well, my own parents have rejected me, so what else have I got to lose?
No, exactly.
And that's quite literally, that's where I found my motivation to explore everything about myself. And that was my sexuality, my feminism, my creativity, my career, the kind of parent I wanted to be. And the only way I've ever been able to feel a true sense of self-worth is by living as authentically as I possibly can, and by letting go of what other people think of me. And that's been my liberation. But let me be really, really, really super clear here. This is not one of those moments where I say, I'm so grateful for the shit that people have done to me because it's made me who I am today. No, absolutely not. No. I don't buy into that mindset, because I will always hold people who do wrong, and if they've done me wrong, I will always hold them accountable. I will never ignore or overlook wrongdoings from other people. But this is instead me saying, I became who I am today in spite of that. So regardless of what happened to me, I still am who I am today, because I saw the situation for what it was. I didn't ignore it. I didn't bury my head in the sand. And I just thought, well, okay, Lejla, you're here now. What are you going to do?
Exactly.
Sink or swim. It's quite literally in those situations. It's a survival of the fittest, sink or swim. And I did what I could with the tools that I had at the time.
And that's all you can do.
Yeah. I didn't let those cultural expectations batter me into a life of unhappiness and submission, because I know for me, adhering to those cultural expectations would have meant me being unhappy.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that life.
And you probably would have had a different life completely.
Yeah. Oh my God. Could you imagine me? Me?
You wouldn't even be sat here.
Imagine me. Someone's wife. A man's wife. Oh, I can't believe I was one man's wife previously.
Let alone
we don't talk about that. Please, please, I did not know who I was.
Let's not
not
scare you. It's not Halloween yet.
Let's pretend that never happened. It's a chapter in my life that never happened.
Do you believe reconciliation is always the goal? Or do you think sometimes it's better to just walk away to protect your own peace?
Okay, so I don't think that it's always the goal. I don't believe it's always the goal. I think that most people want it to be, right? But what we want and what's real are two different things.
So and I think it's the fear as well.
The thing is, yes, absolutely. But it is the fear. But you have a choice. You can either stay stuck in desperately trying to chase something that isn't going to happen, that's not a reality, or you can accept it for what it is, and you can choose to walk away for your own peace of mind.
Yeah.
Because how can you recover in the same space where you were rejected and traumatized? Like if you took a soldier with PTSD and throw them back into the battlefield and you say to them, okay, now you have to heal from what you've been through. You wouldn't, would you? Work. You wouldn't know. You would never say, you wouldn't do that. But yet we expect women to do that every single day. We expect them to minimize their pain and to keep quiet and to endure. We tell them that family is everything, even if that family is the source of their suffering.
Yeah, we do. We do that. And we've molded every single situation for women to abide by that.
Yeah, you're right. And it's really, really stressful to ignore your own suffering. And I simply just won't do that. I simply will not do that. So I had to make a conscious and intentional choice. Like, I want to recover from the shit in my past.
Yeah.
And that meant putting my well-being first. That meant walking away from people, from situations, even if it was a parent. Yeah. I refuse to just put up with any mess in my recovery. Like, I practice this in my life unapologetically now. Like, if something isn't right for me, I walk away. Because if it's going to mess with my recovery and my state of mind, I don't want it. I don't want it. Take it away from me. You have to
protect yourself. No one's going to protect you except for your own self.
Thank you. You have to. And sometimes putting yourself first is really difficult because we have to do things like this. Yeah. And that's actually terrifying. Putting yourself before even your parents.
Yes.
Which is not what we're taught. Women are taught to be primary caregivers. Yeah. And so for a woman to kind of change her mindset like that in our community is really, really difficult. It's really tough.
And it's scary to see a woman do that for a lot of men in the community because it makes them untouchable. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what scares them even more.
Exactly, because now all of a sudden they can't control you. They can't mold and shape you to how they want you to be. But it's just I had to. Yeah. I had to do that for my own mental health.
Well, I'm glad you did, because you're sat here now.
Right, here we go. And this is how Trime was born. In a way, I guess what you have to do in this situation, if you're like in my position, is give yourself a lot of self-love and validation. Self-validation is everything when it comes to overcoming community pressure.
Yeah.
Especially in a culture where women's worth is measured by what she conforms to rather than who she actually is, as we're just saying.
Yeah.
So my own experience has shown me this. So when my family and community rejected me, there was no external validation telling me you're worthy, you're enough just as you are. I had to create that for myself.
Yeah, because no one's going to do it for you.
Exactly. Like, in fact, all I was hearing at the time was the opposite is true. So everything around me was designed to make me feel like I was the problem.
Yeah.
And if I'd waited for acceptance from other people and I based my worth on their approval, I'd just be stuck in this cycle forever.
Yeah, you'd never
I'd
be
be
out of it.
fucking miserable. I'd be fucking miserable. But that's why self-love isn't just an idea, it's survival.
Mm-hmm.
It's what kept me from shrinking, from submitting, from losing myself to just be tolerated by people who refuse to even see me for who I am fully. Why would I do that? Why am I going to shrink myself for people who don't even love me properly?
No, exactly.
So that form of self-validation gave me so much freedom. Like, it allowed me to say, I don't need my parents, I don't need my culture, I don't need my community to tell me I'm worthy. I already am, and I know that now. It meant refusing to let others define me. The thing about self-love is it doesn't erase the rejection, doesn't erase the pain. Like, I still feel the grief, the anger, the loss, which is why I was only really able to begin processing all of these emotions, like I'd say, like in the last 5-6 years, where I finally had the capacity to do so. But what self-love has done is stop that pain from controlling me.
Yeah.
It allows me to hold space for my grief without letting it dictate my choices. And I don't know if that makes sense to anyone at any point in their own recovery, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And I get it. Like, I'm not sitting here saying it's so easy to just do what I did, and I'm not saying that, but I'm learning to make peace with myself. Even though I was the one who was failed, I'm learning to make peace with myself. And a lot of that comes from self-love and self-validation, because my self-worth is deeply rooted in who I am, not how they treat me.
Yeah.
I can separate now after half a decade in therapy. Remember, this is not
I need to get a sticker for you.
I went to therapy for this shit and all I got was a stupid t-shirt. But thanks to therapy, I can now separate my own wounds.
And live life.
Yeah.
You can actually live a fulfilling life.
But the thing is I need people to understand that I don't do this just for myself. I do it because I don't want to project it onto other people around me, but in particular, my daughter.
100%.
So for me, the self-love and self-validation, it's not just important in overcoming community pressure. I feel like it was the only way to break free from it. Genuinely, I feel like it was the only way I could break free from it.
And make sure that it never touches her as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you've seen Bella.
Yeah.
Bella's a fucking force of nature.
She's amazing.
Now. Yeah, like Bella's a force of nature. You can't tell her nothing.
You
cannot tell her nothing. So it works. It works.
Yeah.
It works. And I'm the first in my family to do this.
Yeah.
But this isn't even something that's been practiced for generations, and the impact it's had on my daughter and who she is now as a child, she's only 10, is phenomenal.
She's a walking prime minister.
Exactly. So just imagine,
she's amazing.
and we keep practicing this generation after generation. Imagine what the next generation is going to be like.
Yeah.
The next generation of Albanian girls and women. They're going to be fucking unstoppable.
A force of nature.
Force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
I mean, we already are. We already are a force to be reckoned with, despite all the barriers, despite like all the glass ceilings, despite every shitty thing that has happened to us as Albanian women, systemically, culturally, community-wise. We're still fucking force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I agree.
But just imagine if actually the way was much easier, the path was much easier for the next generation.
You know, it would be... the women would be so strong, but the community would even be strong as well. Yeah, I think a lot of women and men in our community think that holding on to this state of living on how we are, all these rules and regulations and expectations, we have to do it for survival. We have to do it because our forefathers said this. We have to do it. All we are doing is holding ourselves back, men and women together. That's all we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And constantly putting women at risk of violence and abuse.
Constantly.
Because we're ignoring the fact that misogyny in our community actually kills women.
Yeah. It's a real fact.
Fact. Stop acting like misogyny is just this idea and concept. No, it's not. It kills women. Perpetrators kill women every single day worldwide. And it happens in our community. Stop acting like it doesn't.
It does. It happens. Men, they fight for control. These women that lose their lives, unfortunately, are the ones that are trying to live a different life or want to live a different life, whether that's even within the community, but it's the men that think they have the right to choose what is right or wrong for women. How did you process the grief of losing the relationships due to cultural expectations?
Oh God, at the time, not well at all. But bearing in mind, I was still trapped in a relationship with a perpetrator. So that had a huge impact as well. And also had a huge impact on how he controlled me too, because he could constantly go back to, well, your family's this, your family's that, your family don't even love you, blah, blah, blah. So it was really, really difficult because I felt like I had nowhere to turn to. Like I had no breathing space whatsoever. Like I was just in the middle with all of this happening and no safety, no safety, no safe space whatsoever. So I was just surviving. And my only coping mechanism at the time was unhealthy, which is food.
Yeah.
So I was just binging because it was the only thing that I had control over. It's only really been in the last 5 years that I've been able to process the grief and the loss and the anger, and that's through therapy. And when I say grief, I don't mean that I'm sad. Genuinely, I don't mean that I'm sad that I don't have this relationship with my dad, because it just wasn't there to begin with.
Yeah.
The grief comes from knowing that I was robbed of what I deserved as someone's child.
Yeah.
Just like I was saying at the beginning of the episode, like I'm still their child regardless of how old I was, and I was failed. So I had to learn how to parent myself and how to keep myself calm so that my inner child doesn't take over, because she's a fucking wild ride. Like, let me tell you, like little Lejla, because that's what I call my inner child, she is wild. And that's because for most of her whole childhood and even early adulthood, she was hurting, she was angry,
and she was never allowed to be
she
herself.
was never allowed to be herself. Thank you, nail on the head. So like it wasn't until my early 30s when I actually started feeling a sense of safety that I realized just how much pain I'd been carrying. And my mental health took a huge hit. Like it was like depressive episode after depressive episode. Like, and I know now that I've actually suffered from depression from early childhood. I figured that out in therapy. My therapist says it's my coping mechanism, my survival mechanism, because I had no other choice in childhood. I had just suppress how I felt. The thing is though, in my early 30s, I became a single mum because I left my ex-husband, and I had no one else to rely on for help with Bella, and Bella only had me. So if I had no one else to rely on and Bella only had me, so I knew something had to change. I knew something had to give, because Bella deserved me at my best. So at the time, the only tool I had was therapy. And fortunately, because a lot of people can't, in today's day and age, in fucking the current financial climate, can't afford therapy. And it's something that I've worked my arse off to change with LPCMS, with my other work with domestic abuse survivors, and also something that I really want to change, like that we want to implement with Trime as well, is the access to therapy. But it's the only thing I had at the time. As I said, like I didn't have any other Albanian women who had been through what I'd been through. I didn't know them at the time. So I felt like I was completely alone. And so I was just kind of going at it a little bit blind and just hoping for the best. But now I have Trime. And now I have women who just get it. So when I do have those moments where I feel like I'm, sinking a little bit, sometimes it feels like you're just in quicksand. It does. Sometimes you feel like you're in quicksand and you're just trying to climb out the sand. But I don't have to carry it on my own anymore.
No.
Now I know that like there's this community of Albanian women who get it, which is why it's so important to have these open discussions, and why I'm so glad that so many women came out and asked us to have this conversation, because this has been one of the most healing parts of my journey. Trime has 100% changed my own personal recovery.
Same. So, well, I mean, for me, I've never been in therapy, but I've always suppressed my own feelings and always just been the stronger person, always, until Trime came on. And now that Trime's here, I'm going a bit more slower when I manage my emotions really, really well, even when me and my parents go head to
even when it feels like you're sinking.
Even when I feel like I'm sinking, even when I'm discussing some topics with my parents, I feel like I can actually control my emotions, and I don't let that fear and I don't let those angry tears take over me. Now I feel more genuinely, they just come out.
I fucking hate them.
I hate them so much, because you just
and then like your whole point gets lost and everyone calls you hysterical, and just like, oh my god,
my sky. Brought my inner child peace.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that, because the thing is I have carried for a long period of my life a lot of anger and resentment, and that's why recovery is a work in progress. Like, healing's really hard, especially when the people who hurt you refuses to take accountability and refuses to take responsibility, because how do you recover in the absence of accountability? And it's something that I've had to wrestle with my whole life.
Yeah.
Because the people who hurt me never came up to me and said, I'm sorry. Never came up to me and even accepted it. Never came up to me and took any accountability whatsoever. But something someone said today in the Trime community, because we put out a comment box, and it literally sent like tingles down my spine. Shivers, because I thought, how spot on, the most perfect way actually of how to deal with this is such a good piece of advice. And they said, let the hatred fuel your love for your husband or wife. Pour more into that cup instead of focusing on the empty cup your family gives you. Once you release yourself from the need to be validated by your family's acceptance, you will feel free and confident in your decisions. And that's it, isn't it? It's exactly what, when people say, how did you do it? How did you do it? That's how. But I had to figure out the fucking hard way. Instead of pouring energy into people who never accept me for who I am, I now focus where I'm loved. I focus on the people who see me for who I am. I focus on people who accept me fully, who don't place unrealistic expectations and conditions on me. Like, I focus on where I belong. And that shift has been life-changing.
Yeah. You spoke about boundaries. At what point did you realise that boundaries were actually necessary?
So really early on, actually, I noticed that I was starting to get really deeply triggered being around my dad after that reconciliation, that so-called reconciliation, because the moment that I was back in that environment, it became painfully clear that I could no longer ignore how I feel.
Yeah.
I could no longer ignore how this situation was making me feel. And being around him brought those awful, horrific wounds back up. And not only that, he actually hadn't changed the way he was towards me. So it was like I was just reliving it constantly, right? And I realised I'd been carrying that my whole entire life. And so I felt really disconnected.
Yeah. I'm sure you did.
During that period. Yeah. I mean, I know, like, I had also just left my ex-husband. And then this on top, I was just really numb. I was numb. It's like I had to shut down certain parts of myself just to survive those interactions when I was going to the family home, right? That's when I realised that setting boundaries was a non-negotiable for me. Like, I just knew that I couldn't keep exposing myself to the environment, to the situation that pulled me back into survival mode when I was so desperately trying to stay above water for the sake of my child, for myself and for my child. Like, I realised that I couldn't just survive anymore. I didn't want to just survive anymore. Like, I wanted to protect my mental health, not just for myself, but for Bella too. So I took responsibility in order to break that cycle. So I didn't have many places to turn to, but I still knew that I refused to pass down that same cycle of pain. So for me, setting those boundaries didn't mean cutting people off completely, because I obviously still have a relationship with the majority of my family. It just meant defining what access people had to me. It meant recognizing that I could allow my daughter to have a relationship with her grandparents without sacrificing my own well-being. It meant that I was finally prioritizing myself. Finally prioritizing myself instead of constantly managing other people's feelings.
And it paid off.
It has done. I mean, it's taken a bloody long time, but it absolutely does. I just thought, why is it constantly me? Why is it always me having to suppress myself and how I feel to manage the situation around me, right? So when I first started putting down these boundaries, it definitely was overwhelming, like had that overwhelming sense of guilt. Mainly for my mum. I knew that she had this idolized fairy tale version of what she wanted our family to be. So by enforcing those boundaries, I knew that I was shattering it. And the thing is, honestly, what mum doesn't want that? That perfect, harmonious family life. Like, what parent doesn't want that? Well, you'd like to think that parents want that. But I also realised and knew that maintaining that illusion came at a cost of my own well-being.
Yeah. And it's not real.
It's not real. That's why I use this word a lot, the realization, because that's exactly what it was. It was like I was waking up, because the realization was fucking painful for me. And I struggled at first to put boundaries down because I didn't want to disappoint her. And this is where like my therapist, he always gets really frustrated with me because he's like, I always have to try and make sense of my emotions and like logically, it's like I always have to understand them, which I'm working really hard not to do. He's always like, you have to feel them, not understand them, just feel them. For me, sometimes I can't help it. And at the time, I knew I wanted to kind of like break this cycle. So I was quite literally researching what I was feeling. I was quite literally going onto Google and researching what my feelings meant at the time. And that's when I came across this concept called enmeshment. And all of a sudden it just clicked in my head. It all clicked and it all made so much sense. Like almost everyone in our community is enmeshed in their families.
For everyone, including myself, what is enmeshment?
So enmeshment happens when personal boundaries between family members are blurred. So making it really difficult to develop an independent sense of self, right? Does that sound familiar to anyone who's listening? If you say you don't recognise that as an Albanian woman, as an Albanian person, I will actually... pigs are flying.
You're too far.
Yeah, our pigs are flying. If you haven't ever felt this sense of enmeshment, lucky you. But enmeshment in families in particular is about loyalty, obligation, and often overriding your own individual needs for the greater good of the family, right? Your emotions become so entangled with other family members that it feels like when you want to assert yourself or put yourself first, that you are betraying them. That even in times of when they are causing you suffering and grief, that you are still somehow being a traitor or betraying your family by putting yourself first, i.e. for me, it was putting down these boundaries, right? So I started to realise that the guilt I was feeling wasn't just about disappointing my mum, that actually it was a result of this enmeshment that had been drilled into my head, that family is everything, family first over everything, even if your family make you suffer, which is not what we should be teaching women ever.
No.
Yes, family is everything, and yes, family should be a priority, but not at the sake of your own physical, mental or emotional safety.
No, absolutely
never, ever, ever. And it felt like at the time that my mother's happiness or my family's happiness depended on me keeping the peace. That's what it's felt like my whole life, depended on me keeping the peace. So then by putting down these boundaries, it kind of felt like I was doing something wrong, even though what I was doing was in an effort to preserve myself, an effort to preserve my mental health. But the truth is, this guilt wasn't mine to carry. This guilt was never mine. It was not my burden. It was a learned response shaped by this family dynamic that so many of us as Albanians have, where the individual needs of a person, in particular a woman, are never prioritised.
No, and they're just seen alien, and they're seen more as like, we don't do those kind of things. That's a Western thing.
Yeah, we're traditional. Oh my God, if I could ban one word from our community, it's tradition. I swear to God.
2 words.
If I could ban one word from our community, because the way that tradition is used is purely to beat women into submission.
Everything. It's used...
So in a way, actually trying to be logic about my emotions really helped. It really helped in that particular moment, because understanding enmeshment helped me separate what emotions were truly mine versus what was placed onto me by family expectations, by cultural expectations. So that really, really helped. I had to remind myself that setting boundaries wasn't a rejection of my mother. It wasn't a rejection of my family. It was an act of self-preservation.
Yeah.
And it was, at that time, it was paramount. I absolutely had to do that for myself. Most importantly, I realised that loving my family didn't mean sacrificing my own well-being.
No, and it never should be.
And it absolutely never should. That guilt didn't disappear overnight, definitely not. But much like shedding the mare, because we've spoken about that before as well, like it's just faded over time, I guess. Like I started to see how much better I felt, how much better my mental health felt. Like I stopped having depressive episode after depressive episode. I stopped feeling so emotionally exhausted all the time. I felt lighter, I felt more in control. And for the first time, I felt so free from these expectations that had been weighing down on me so heavy. So setting down those boundaries, they weren't about punishing anyone. It was about protecting myself. And that refusal to feel guilt for it anymore. I refuse to feel guilty about these things anymore.
But you shouldn't,
I should have never done. As I said, the guilt wasn't mine. The same way that the mare wasn't mine. This isn't my burden to bear. And I refuse. Like, I've let go of it. Like, it's just not mine to bear. If anyone else wants to feel it, so be it. That's on them. That's not on me.
So after all of this, the
God,
final
we went
word.
deep. I feel like I've bared my soul on this.
But I think it's so good though.
I've also, by the way, like, I've never actually gone this deep about this topic before.
Yeah.
I've never had the space to.
I'm so proud of you. Genuinely, I'm so proud of you. The good thing that you have is you have this aura that you are like the bad bitch until they get to know you, and then you're just mushy.
I'm literally.
But you'll see
I'm
that
not a bad bitch. I'm actually a lover girl, really. I'm a good, clean-hearted lover girl. I'm not a bad bitch. I take that back. I'm always a crying mess. I am.
I know, yeah, you are.
I am. I'm soft. I'm genuinely so soft.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks I'm like this, like cold-hearted, stone-hearted bitch.
Everyone, each time I meet someone at an event, like when I went to the event, they're like, "Oh, you know, you always, you know, you look like the sweet one." And I'm like,
I love it. Let them think.
Let them think that. Confrontational one, bitch. Like, anyways, what is your piece of advice for any Albanian woman that has been rejected for her dating choices?
For their dating choices. So to any Albanian woman listening to this who's gone through something similar, whether it was that you dated outside the culture or even this happens to women who date inside the culture as well. So, you know, like this isn't just exclusive to those of us who dated outside the culture. So if you feel that weight of rejection, that disappointment, that mara, that shame because of who you love, I want you to know this, that you are not alone.
Yeah.
I know how painful it feels when you have to choose between love and your family, between happiness and their acceptance. But the truth is, love should never come at a cost of your own self-worth. Your choices, your happiness, your future, that belongs to you, not to tradition, not to fear, and certainly not to anyone else's expectations. Yeah. If your family is making you feel like you're unworthy and dishonourable because of who you love, then please understand that their rejection is not a reflection of your worth. Yeah. That it's a reflection of their limitations, of their conditioning, of their inability to see beyond what they've been taught, or as I often say, to see further than the end of their nose. Yeah. That doesn't make their actions right. Yeah. It just because that they have that inability to see beyond that point doesn't mean that it's okay for them to behave how they do or how they have, but it does mean that you don't have to carry the weight of their judgment as your burden. It doesn't belong to you. Find a way to let go of it. And grief, you have to realize, life is this whole big paradox of emotions. It's not linear. Things are like in swirls like this. It's never going to be one straight line. Like grief and love can coexist. You can grieve the family that you wish you had while still choosing the life that you deserve. It feels like a huge loss maybe because you really wanted their approval, but you stand firm in the decisions that you make. Believe that this is what's right for you. It's not easy, but the life you build outside of these expectations can be beautiful. And most importantly, it's yours. And that's the one thing I can truly say about my life. I live a life that I love. That's where a lot of my happiness comes from now. That's where a lot of my peace comes from, because I created a life that was right for me, that is good for me. Most importantly, because I had to learn this about myself in my recovery, is that you're no less Albanian because you choose to love on your own terms. You do not lose your identity. You don't lose your roots. You don't lose your culture just because you refuse to conform to this outdated idea of what an Albanian woman should be. You're still Albanian, yeah? It still runs through your blood. And you deserve a love that feels free, that feels safe, and makes you feel chosen without conditions. So just hold on to that. If you think that there's absolutely no hope, I promise you there is. If you ever feel alone, remember that you're so seen. Yeah. That you're understood, that you are now part of a community where women have walked this path before you and they're here with you now. The women in the Trime community are here with you, standing by your side.
If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe, leave us a comment and like. We'd love to hear from you.
Or as Bella would say, smash the like button. Oh my God, that was so cringe. Lejla, edit that out.
No. Okay. Doesn't matter.